according to a man named Mark Ouellette, most analysis of video games assume that violent video games lead young players to become violent themselves, and thus that the violence in these video games is portrayed as a positive or a good thing. Now, we here at the Umbrella Research Team are not like most analysts. We came up with our own idea, at least in terms of the game Skyrim. In Skyrim, the game simply places the player in a violent world, and the player is forced to make choices accordingly.
Unlike some games, which force the player to commit acts of violence in a set track, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, allows the player to choose how they perpetrate violence, if at all. Much of the violence in the game has heavy religious overtones, which shape the player's experience and choices throughout the game.
Skyrim is an open-world fantasy RPG role-playing game. It's the fifth game in the Elder Scrolls series. It's set 200 years after the last game, which was set in Cyrodiil, a province south of Skyrim. And when we say open world, and something that we covered in the video, is the fact that it's a sandbox game, so there's no real limitation of what you can do, where you can go. A lot of games before this, I think this game kind of set the precedent, for just the way games function, their mechanics anyway. And you have no invisible boundaries. The only thing that keeps you between cells in the game is just a loading screen. And then the backstory, the story of the video game Skyrim is set in the province of Skyrim, part of the world of Tamriel. Tamriel is actually the continent in the world that the Elder Scrolls games takes place in. That's the main setting for all of the games in the Elder Scrolls series. And as we pointed out in the video, and as you saw some footage of, Skyrim is racked by civil war and overrun by dragons, and these are violent situations that the player is thrust into immediately, and with quite a quick exposition that you see. So that's basically just kind of a run through of what you're getting into when you start the game.
Skyrim, the fifth game in the Elder Scrolls series, is a first-person fantasy role-playing game set in one province, Skyrim, of the larger world of Tamriel. It is an open-world game, meaning that players are not tied down to any one storyline, and are able to explore the world at their leisure, and can pick up and put down quests and entire plotlines as they wish. Skyrim is racked by civil war, besieged by dragons, and divided between two sets of deities, the Divines and the Daedric Princes. While it is possible to play without engaging in violent actions, the majority of the game's quests require the player to enter violent situations.
Okay, a little bit about our team. We are the Umbrella Research Team, and we actually got along pretty well, surprisingly. We're very different people with many different strengths. That actually worked really well, and we enjoyed spending time together. Our research methods, we went to the DMC and worked in the gaming lab most of the time, and Ryan, this Skyrim game was his game to play, so he sat and we all kind of sat around taking notes and helped him make decisions. We also spent a lot of time in the North Spencer parlor with our meetings, talking.
We collected data through the method of close play over a span of 5 weeks in 5-hour-long sessions of play in the Digital Media Commons in the Jackson Library at UNCG. The full Umbrella Research Team was present most weeks, save one time, with the same person, save a few times, playing throughout all of the sessions. Data was also cross-referenced with information at the unofficial Elder Scrolls Pages Wiki, or UESP.
Our best example was in the very beginning of the game. The player is immediately thrust into the Civil War, which is the war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperial soldiers, and they are fighting for the right to worship Talos. And this is when you see the player in the wagon with the other traders of the Empire, and he is immediately forced to make violent decisions and has to pick a side.
The The best example of this is in the opening scene, where the player is thrust into religious war between the Stormcloaks, separatist Nords fighting for the right to worship the god Talos, and Imperial soldiers defending the recent ban on Talos worship. The player finds himself sentenced to death and must choose a side almost immediately. Both the circumstances of the character's immediate situation within his world, and the mechanics of the game itself, in that this scene is part of a closed-world tutorial sequence, force the player to engage in the violence and align himself with one faction or the other.
Okay, so we kind of touched on each of these quests in the video, but I'm just going to elaborate on them a little bit more. So the first one was Ill Met by Moonlight, where the Daedric Prince Hercene tells you to go kill this werewolf that he doesn't like. And over the course of the quest, you have to choose whether to actually kill the werewolf or to kill the other hunters who are trying to get it. So this just shows that if you're going to participate in the quest at all, you have to make a violent action. And there isn't a violent, glorified, heroic choice and then a significantly lamer, non-violent choice. It's violent either way, and you have to make a moral choice, like, while accepting that you are going to have to do something violent.
We argue that Skyrim does not encourage violence. It places the character in a world in which violence exists and allows him to make choices accordingly. The first violent choice to examine was Ill Met by Moonlight, a quest during which the player is faced with a decision. He can help a werewolf fight off a group of hunters, or he can follow the instructions of the Daedric Prince Hircine and kill him.
Our second quest that we examined was the Skyrim Civil War. And basically the thing with this is when your country is filled with warring factions, you kind of have to do violent things sometimes in order to not die. So it isn't saying violence is great, we should all go to war. It's saying war happens sometimes, and we all have to do what we have to do to do.
The player faces another set of violent choices in the Skyrim Civil War questline. The player is put in a violent world and is forced to take a side of violence or die. In order to proceed with the storyline, the player must choose to side with either the Stormcloaks or the Imperials. Story-wise, the player is forced to take sides in order to survive in a land racked by war.
And the last quest we looked at was Season Ending, in which you can actually forge a peace treaty to end the war, which just shows that even in intensely large-scale violent situations, it is possible to find a peaceful solution.
However, the Season Unending quest is an option in Skyrim, where the player can choose to not engage in violence and negotiate a truce. A treaty is eventually made, and the war is ended along with the quest. In this case, a non-violent choice can be made in a violent world. Most people would view Skyrim and games like it as mindless entertainment as well as violence for the sake of violence. The choice of playing the game means engaging oneself into that violence, but not necessarily condoning it. When playing the game with that knowledge, it is crucial the player understands the climate of violence within the game and how to act accordingly.
So why should you care? It's kind of the main question that we're asking, and the main answer that we have is that just because there is violence, just because you have to participate in the violence to set through the game. At the end of the video, you see the drawbridge going down, and that kind of lets the soldiers spill into Whiterun, the city that's being sieged, and that was just kind of a metaphor in saying that, as a mechanic, violence is used to progress in the game, and if you don't participate in this violence in certain aspects in the game, you can't progress. And yeah, so Skyrim is just, in Skyrim, violence is just part of the game's mechanics, and without participating in it, you can't progress in the game.